So we saw the things last week where we talked about the original manuscripts, and we talked about how the transmission of the text and how it's important for us to not count each one as the same. If you remember a couple of weeks ago, we saw the picture that had 46 dots on there, but they all came from the one original witness or the one original dot. And so I just wanted to kind of refresh your mind on that because we're going to be talking about that in a couple of weeks. And I realize if I don't say something about that, maybe incrementally as we get there, I may say something in 3 weeks. You're like, man, that was last month. I ain't got a clue. You know, a lot has happened since then. If you were here Wednesday night and braved 12-degree weather in the ice, we talked a little bit about the English Bible and the formation of it. We're going to continue that study this morning. If you weren't here, we talked about how up until the 1300s, there was not an English Bible that we could read. There were a few guys who had translated from the Latin text and who had given either some commentary or who wrote some verses about the English Bible. But up until John Wycliffe, we did not have an English Bible complete that people could read. And so I wanted us to refresh our minds with John Wycliffe that we did talk about on Wednesday night, and then go in, and I'm going to try to see if we can get to the King James Version this morning. And so that's the goal for our class. John Wycliffe and William Tyndale were both courageous men who sacrificed immensely for us to be able to have the English Bible in our hands. John Wycliffe was born in 1320 and died around 1384. He produced the first complete English translation of the Bible. Does anybody remember the difference between John Wycliffe and William Tyndale from Wednesday night? They both did it first, but it was a little bit different. Why was John Wycliffe's first English Bible different than William Tyndale's first English Bible? Well, they were both complete. We think that John Wycliffe's Old Testament wasn't complete, and then John Pulvery, one of his assistants, completed it after his death, pretty quickly after his death. But, Brittany? Not mass production. The base text. What was that, Steve? We did stop before Tyndale, and you're right. So it's kind of an unfair question. You know, life's not fair. You know, the reason John Wycliffe's version is important because it is the first complete English Bible. But what took place, or what was what was wrong with it, was that it was written from the Latin, and so he used the Latin Vulgate, Jerome's 5th century Latin translation, as his base text. Now, why would he have done that? It was it. I mean, that was the Catholic Bible. I mean, Jerome's Vulgate was the Bible. And so it was written in Latin. And so when John Wycliffe writes his English Bible, he's using the standard church Bible of his day, which is the Latin Vulgate. He doesn't use the originals. And so John does this. John becomes kind of this rogue guy. He teaches at Oxford, but he starts speaking out against some very hardcore Catholic doctrines of the time. He attacks veneration of the saints. He attacks the sacraments. He attacks requiem masses. He attacks monks. He attacks the very existence and purpose of the papacy. And so he becomes extremely unpopular. He's fired from Oxford because he's saying all these things against the church. And after his death in 1415, he's condemned as a heretic. And then a few decades later, about a decade later, in 1428, by the order of Pope Martin V, his body is exhumed. It's burned, and is thrown in the River Swift. And so they desecrate his body. The Bibles are outlawed, they're burned, they're taken away, and it's this really big deal. But enough people have seen this English Bible, or who have heard about this English Bible and the language that they can read, and people start getting extremely excited about it, and you see this clinging for an English Bible become stronger and stronger. Questions or comments so far about John Wycliffe? This is Wycliffe. This is Wycliffe. This is where we stopped Wednesday night and where we started today.
Okay. And so he used
the Vulgate. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. He used the Latin Vulgate for his translation, and so he translated it from the Latin to English.
Few people were educated, which very few were educated in Latin. I mean, it's like
Oh yeah, I mean it was.
people of the day.
Yeah, I mean, most people who had been to school, well, like school at that time, who had been to college, study Latin, could read Latin. I mean, that was the language of the church. If you were a priest this time, you'd have done mass in Latin, and so the common man had no clue on earth what they were saying or how to read Latin. But if you had been to college or educated, then you could probably do Latin pretty well. I mean, Latin has been taught. I mean, Latin was taught in colleges for the educated. I mean, people still take classes in Latin, but Latin is no longer considered to be like a foundational college curriculum. And so most people who study Latin today are philologists. They study languages. In the 1700s, if you were going to be a doctor or a lawyer, they thought you need to know Latin. But now it's not as prominent. But yes, during that time frame, people like Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, that would have still been a part of the European style of education of studying Latin.
It's like all the plants and things have what we call a scientific name, which is actually
Yeah.
Latin name, correct? That was
Yeah. Yeah, Latin and Greek. A lot of them are in Greek actually, but there's several that are in Latin too. But yeah, that's one of the reasons why. Yes, Jerome made the Latin Vulgate from the Hebrew and the Greek text in the 5th century. I mean, Jerome was brilliant. I mean, he was extremely smart. And the church wanted a Latin Bible. They wanted one, even as early as the 5th, 6th century, the church wanted one standard Bible for people to read. And they wanted it in Latin because the church was centered in Rome. And so they got Jerome, who was one of the smartest men alive at that time, who was a Christian, and they said, we need a new Bible, you're going to make it. And that's what Jerome did. And
Did Jerome actually live in Bethlehem, or is that a different one? He moved to Bethlehem?
yeah, I think you're right, because I'm pretty sure that Jerome did the Vulgate near Jerusalem. Bethlehem's like 2 miles outside of Jerusalem, so he was pretty close. Origen also moved down to Palestine and stayed there too. So, both extremely influential in the early church. Good questions. Any other questions? John? Lisa, did I?
It's okay. I think you kind of answered it. I was just going to say, does that mean that the errors that were in that translation for the Catholic Church would have been translated over to us?
That's right. If there were things that were wrong in the Vulgate, John Wycliffe would have copied it because that would have been the text that he was using.
So Wycliffe wrote this, translated this book. So what was this book's history? Who controlled its being copied? Who copied it? And where did it go?
Well, this was before the printing press, and so if you wanted a copy of John Wycliffe's Bible, you had to be very rich because Bibles were extremely expensive, and that's one of the reasons why peasants couldn't read, because they couldn't even afford the paper to find stuff to read. It was extremely expensive, and so this would have been for like barons and lords and for people of wealth of note, and they would have been able to, hush hush, wink wink, pay a guy to copy this Bible so they could get it.
For their personal use? For
their personal use. This was not used in the churches. In the 1300s, you have this Congregationalist, Protestant, Anabaptist movement where people are starting to break away from the Catholic Church. They're probably preaching sermons in English, but they may get their hands on the English Bible, but in the sanctioned churches of the time, which would have been the Roman Catholic Church in England, this is before the Church of England split, they would have still been using the Latin. They would have not used English Bibles in the churches. So this would have just been for personal study and usage. Does that answer your question?
Any idea on how many of those Bibles were produced?
I don't know. Probably dozens, if not hundreds. We have 8 fragmented copies of the originals of like either the Tyndale Bible or the Wycliffe Bible. I don't know.
Do any of those exist in completion?
I don't know if they're complete. I think we've got 8 from like one of the original editions, but I don't know if they're like complete. I just don't know. We might. I don't know. Now you can look at the Wycliffe Bible. There's enough history behind it where there's a compile. You can see what it looked like. But I don't know if we have like one that's got the whole thing. We might. I just don't know.
Was it a complete Bible like we know the Bible now?
It was. It was the complete Old Testament and New Testament. Now, some scholars suggest that he didn't finish the Old Testament and that his apprentice finished the Old Testament for him after he died. And so, but yes, it was the first complete English Bible that we have. Now, the other first that we're going to talk about is a guy named William Tyndale. And this guy is important because it is the first English Bible to be written from the originals. And so William Tyndale said, I appreciate the work of John Wycliffe. I appreciate the fact that he wants an English Bible in the hands of people, but I don't appreciate the fact that he used the Latin. If we're going to have an English Bible, we need to have the originals. And so William Tyndale was extremely smart. He Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Arabic. This guy was just a genius. And so he said, I'm going to go back to the original languages, and I'm going to see that, and I'm going to make an English translation of myself. This was a very big deal because not only was he breaking away, this was extremely important symbolically because this is right on the heels of the Reformation. And what he was saying is, not only do I not trust the Catholic Church, I don't trust their Bible because it was the Latin Vulgate. He said, I don't want the Latin. And the church is like, you don't need the originals, read this one. And he says, I don't want that one. I'm going back to the originals. And so even him going back to the original text was a defiant move in the face of the church at the time. And so he was an extremely smart guy. He was also put on anybody know anything about Henry VIII? King? And something about his personal life that caused some problems? Marriage and divorce still causing problems, right? No, but his first marriage to Catherine of Aragon was a big deal, right? Because he wanted an annulment. The Pope wouldn't give him an annulment. And so it pretty much winds up him creating the Church of England, naming himself the head of the church in England. Well, there were still people who said, this is just wrong. You can't divorce Catherine. You don't have a biblical divorce for marriage. Yeah, or something like that. You know what I'm trying to say. And so William Tyndale was one of those guys that wrote articles and published them and said, you can't divorce her. And so then William Tyndale becomes a marked man. And so Henry VIII puts out a hit order on William Tyndale while he's trying to do the English Bible. And so he actually has to flee England. He goes to Brussels, and that's where he does the English translation for the Bible. And so he's there, he's working on the Old Testament, he's working on the New Testament, and then he was condemned of heresy on August the 5th, 1536, after he was kidnapped. And so they sent people to Brussels to where he was hiding out, working on the English Bible, and kidnapped him, brought him back to the English-controlled territory at that time, which also extended a little bit in France, and convicted him of heresy and then executed him 2 months later because of writing the Bible in English and also because of what he said about Henry VIII, about his divorce to Catherine. But the interesting thing is, Tyndale wasn't done. And so he was able to have paper and the Hebrew text smuggled into his prison cell. And he died just after completing the Old Testament. And so some of the last days of his life in a jail cell were hurriedly trying to make sure that he could get the Bible into English. And then that was smuggled to England, where it started to spread like wildfire because the printing press at this time had just come out. Yes?
Where would you learn Koine Greek in the 16th century? I'm kind of surprised that people cared enough to even teach Koine Greek, since no one would have used it for this purpose. They would use Latin.
Right. The vast majority of priests who had been to seminaries and schools, even maybe the majority of professors at that time wouldn't have probably fooled with it. But you had some guys that were just like Justin Rogers smart. You know what I'm saying? And William Tyndale fit that mold. Like Tyndale, Erasmus. This movement towards the originals was already kind of starting. And so these guys were just, they could speak 5 or 6 languages. Like Tyndale could probably speak English and French and maybe some German and Latin. And, they were just, you find those guys that just, I don't know. They just got it. Yeah, and Tyndale was just one of those guys. I mean, and so was Erasmus and Wycliffe, and they were just, once generational type individuals. And like what William Tyndale does is so impressive that the English translations that are used after his life rely heavily on his translation. And so he was just the man. I mean, I don't know how to say that another way. I mean, he was just a genius. I mean, really. Well, I mean, I think the Lord wants us to have a translation that we can read and understand. I don't think that Tyndale was inspired, but I do think he was an inspirational person. And I think that he had a godly motivation to get people the Bible. Some quotes of William Tyndale. One of the quotes is, "I defy the Pope with all of his laws. If God spares my life ere many years, I will cause a boy that driveth the plow to know more Scripture than you do." And he was talking to an embassy from the Catholic Church that was getting on to him for what he was doing. Another one that he did when he was on trial, he said this, "I call God to record against the day we shall appear before our Lord Jesus that I never altered one syllable of God's word against my conscience, nor would do to this day if all that is in the earth, whether it be honor, pleasure, or riches, might be given to me." And so he was defending his translation and said, I'll stand before God, and I've never altered one syllable against my conscience, And so he was strangled to death, and then his body was burned at the stake. And according to history, his last words were, "Lord, open the King of England's eyes." It's interesting that 4 years after William Tyndale was strangled and burned at the stake for writing the English translation, that the King of England commissions an English Bible to be made. And they basically copied William Tyndale's.
How long did you say?
4 years. So I think it's Henry VIII. I think it was the same guy. It's the same time. But it's amazing that they kill William Tyndale, strangle him to death for making an English Bible, and then 4 years later take his Bible, take his name off of it, and then assimilate it in the churches and put the King stamp on it. It's pretty low. Pretty low.
Would you say he went to the originals? I mean, like, what manuscripts did he get? I mean, I'm assuming you couldn't just go down to the old London bookshop and get a copy from,
No, and that's a fantastic question. I've got it here. I think he used Erasmus's publication. Let's see here.
I mean, the oldest manuscripts were found like monasteries in the desert or something, weren't they? Like the Sinaitic manuscript or something like that.
Yeah, Sinaiticus was found in the Sinai Desert at a monastery by Tischendorf. That's right. In the 1700s. Was Tischendorf 1700s? Something like that. But yeah, it would have been after this time. And so he uses Erasmus's Greek translation, which is one of the reasons, Tyndale was a genius, but he also uses Erasmus's translation, I believe, of the English Bible, which is interesting because we're going to talk about that a little bit later, because that's basically the Greek text that William Tyndale uses that is used all the way to the King James Bible. And so the question that you're asking of where do they get these Greek manuscripts is important, because basically Erasmus has about 8 Greek translations. And in fact, for several parts of the New Testament, I think the entire book of Revelation, except for a small part, he has to actually translate from Latin into Greek. And so he makes his own Greek translation from Latin. And so one of the reasons we're going to be talking about this a little bit later is because one of the calls for modern translation is all the Greek manuscripts that we have found since the time of William Tyndale or the King James Bible. And all the scholarship and the textual criticism, Counting versus Wayne, that question is going to become extremely important, because it's great to have the Bible in English and it's great to have it from the original manuscripts, the original languages, but then you ask yourself, how trustworthy is the original manuscripts that we have?
They wouldn't have had access to the same textual criticism and stuff that we do today.
No.
So they would have just had to accept it.
Exactly. When Erasmus puts out his Greek translation, there's a few Greek texts for the whole New Testament, but there's like 2. There's like Erasmus and some other dude's name that I've forgotten. I think he was a Spanish guy. But Yeah. Any other questions before we go on with Tyndale?
Just a point here on John Wycliffe before we leave, he was excommunicated and also sentenced to die.
Yes, he was excommunicated and then killed. That's right. And so after William Tyndale, what you have here is the Cloverdale Bible. And so that's published in 1535. Coverdale used the Tyndale's New Testament and the Pentateuch, and he based the remaining Old Testament off the Vulgate. It was the first translation where the Apocrypha was placed separately in an index. Coverdale did help with the phraseology of Tyndale's work. He was one of Tyndale's apprentices. And yes?
Are you saying the Apocrypha was or was not included previously? And now it is or now it isn't?
It wasn't included in a separate appendix.
But it was included in
Yes.
the text?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
Not 100% sure, but I'm 80% sure. But
Wycliffe and Tyndale?
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure that would have been also in their translation. And so here Cloverdale takes the Apocrypha and he puts it in an appendix, which is also a growing sign of the Protestant movement against the church. They had always been seen, even by the Catholic Church, as being second or, not as original as the originals. But Cloverdale says, well, if that's the case, then we're just not even going to put them in. Or we're going to put them in a separate part of the Bible. Thomas Cromwell, who was the Chancellor of England, was really interested in this translation, and he got it to be circulated freely throughout England. And Cloverdale helped with the Great Bible and the Geneva Bible. And so here in 1535, he makes this Bible. He pretty much just takes William Tyndale's New Testament, his first 5 books of the Old Testament. He changes some of the rest of the Old Testament. The Lord Chancellor Cromwell of England says, I like this. We're going to print this and send it out to the churches. We're going to print this out and send it to people. And so Cloverdale's version is big because it's the first one the state doesn't persecute. And so now having the English Bible in your possession is no longer a crime. And so you see the English Bible started to be more and more disseminated and more people started reading the Bible. Now, why would Cromwell want to do that? Anybody know anything about like English history?
Well, it was the state that was head of the church then?
At that time, it was because they had just broken away from the Catholic Church, and the Church of England had just been formed. It was basically the Catholic Church, but instead of answering the Pope, they answered to the King. And what was your question?
The state was, at the time, was the head of the Church of England. It was,
Yeah.
it's the king,
No,
like the Pope.
Yeah, no, the head of church and state, the separation of church and state was not in existence this time. And so, yeah, the state was extremely concerned about the religious matters of the kingdom.
And so the chancellor was below the king.
He was.
And was he competing with the king in that?
No, he wasn't competing, but he was Cromwell was kind of the power behind the throne. It got him in trouble because he kind of overstepped, because he kind of ran England like he was the king. But he was very pro-Protestant movement. And so he was all for getting the Bible into English and getting it assimilated, because he thought that would hurt the Catholic Church in England and kind of solidify the Church of England's stance. Because they were trying really hard to prove that the Catholic Church is bad, Church of England good, Protestantism is the way to go. And so he saw the English Bible as a way to propel that ideology. Does that make sense? Okay. Good. And so after the Cloverdale Bible, we have the Matthew's Bible. It's given to Thomas Matthew was the pseudonym, but it was probably done by John Rogers. It's the first English translation to have to have a couple of apocryphal things inserted. He spoke in February of 1555. He was burned alive at Smithfield, and he's recognized as one of the first Protestant martyrs. And so he's burned alive at the stake in 1555. The French ambassador who was there at the execution said that he died with such composure that it might have been a wedding. And so apparently John Rogers, whenever he was burned alive, was just really astute and okay with what was going on.
Church of England or Catholic Church?
I think it may have been, let's see here. I'm not sure. Honestly, I can't say. I'm not sure who was that. You want to Google that, Sam? John Rogers.
Was there a particular reason that these people would burn
somebody, instead of just saying excluding any other way? Was there a particular reason for the burning?
One of the ideas was that if you burned the body, they couldn't be resurrected because the body was desecrated. That was one of the reasons why. Another reason why is just extremely painful and torturous, and it was really cheap and easy to do if you're the one burning them. Yeah, I mean, they were just, it was rough. And it was a sign to other people. I mean, the more gruesome the death, the more or less likely other people are going to do it. One of the reasons you see the struggle here is because of what takes place in the leadership of England. Anybody ever heard of Bloody Mary? Not the drink, the person, right? King Henry VIII's daughter, right? She's Catherine's daughter. Catherine was extremely Catholic, right? Henry VIII, throws off the Catholic Church of England. Then Mary comes to the throne. Well, she's Catholic. She tries to restore the Catholic stronghold of England, and she pretty much kills anybody and everything that she thinks is anti-Catholic, which includes people who write English Bibles. And so that may have been one of the reasons why you see these martyrs. And so that's why she's called Bloody Mary. She killed so many people. And basically just because of their religious beliefs was pretty much the only reason why. She blamed them for her mother's divorce and stuff like that, and breaking away from the Catholic Church. After that, you have the Traveler's Bible. This was the first Bible to be completely printed in England. And so now the printing press has made its way across the pond. They've got that technology in England, and so now they're starting to mass produce these Bibles in England, and they're getting more and more traction.
I believe that John Rogers was, in fact, killed by supporters of the Crown.
Okay, so it would have been the Crown, the Church of England,
Not
pro.
necessarily the Queen herself, but people who were underneath her.
Yeah, so it was the time of Mary?
Yeah.
Okay, so this was the time of the Protestant persecutions. And so this would have been Bloody Mary. I mean, it would have been that time frame. Round up all the infidels and kill them, And so, any questions so far on those?
I'll read Bibles because people couldn't read. Who tells them the truth? How to become a Christian and how to
Yeah.
deal with God. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of people, all of God will
Yeah. No, the question is, at this time, you had a lot of people that couldn't read, so they had to take somebody's word for it, right? Whether it's the people who were, at Mass in the Catholic Church that are at the church buildings in the Church of England, or who were starting to go to these congregational churches dotted in around England at the time and all of Europe, basically. And so the question is, so the guy that couldn't read Latin, the guy that didn't understand how to read English even, he's just sitting in a pew and he's just listening to whoever's preaching on that Sunday. And so the question is, how accountable are they?
I mean, I know you can't hardly,
Yeah.
God.
Well, I mean, there's a reason I'm not the judge, right? I mean, I have a sympathetic heart towards them because they didn't know, right? Many of them didn't even have the opportunity to be able to read or write.
Even had they would have probably had access to scriptures anyway.
Yeah.
Very few, like I said.
Yeah. I've heard preachers say they're going to be okay. I've heard preachers say they're not going to be okay. And honestly, I just don't know. I mean, I can't make that judgment call. I know what the Bible says in Matthew 28. It's pretty plain. If we could get by on ignorance, I don't know why we would have to send missionaries to places that have never heard the gospel. And so that scares me in that respect. I'm also comforted by the fact that I don't have to make that call. I'm worried about the person in Chapel Hill who's at a church building right now who's hearing things that is wrong, and they can go to Dollar General and get a Bible for $2 and read it if they wanted to. And so the lost tribe of the Amazon, we could have that debate, but most people who have that debate, are in a situation where it doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? We could talk about that for the next 30 minutes, and I still wouldn't give you an answer because I just don't know. And so, but it makes you wonder, and it makes me thankful that I don't have to worry about that because I have the Bible in English and I can read it for myself. And I don't have to listen to some preacher and just take his advice for it. Some of you are in this building today because you were raised in a denomination or you were raised in some congregation and your eyes were like, why have they never told me this? And so if you've experienced that for yourself personally, some of you are in here who are raised in the church and you've come through that of your own volition. And some of you are in the church who are raised in the church and you've only took what the preacher said, hook, line, and sinker for decades. Don't do that. Because you wouldn't be the first person to be duped. Make your faith something that is got some substance to it. Be sure that when somebody's preaching that you're in your Bible and you're listening and you're making sure that what they're saying, because you have that ability, right? I mean, the 13th century Englishman pushing the plow can claim ignorance, right? We can't. I mean, that thing, if it is a valid excuse, it's no longer valid today in our situation. And so, good question. Yes, Sam?
Mary's still the head of the Church of England.
Was Queen Mary. When she became the throne, she tried to dismantle the Church of England.
Okay, that's what I thought then, because I also read that he was offered a pardon if he returned to the Catholic Church.
Yeah. And so like even though she was the head of England and the Church of England had already been established, she tries to dismantle the Church of England and push everybody back towards Catholicism. And if you couldn't hear Sam said that John Rogers was given the option if he would convert back to the Catholic Church, she would drop all the charges and he'd be fine. And he wouldn't do that, and so they burned him at the stake. And so, we're not going to get to the King James. All right. 1539, you have the Great Bible. And you get the name called the Great Bible not because it was great, but because it was 15 inches by 10 inches. It's huge. It's massive. This is the first Bible to be adopted by the Church of England and King Henry VIII. And so this is the first authorized version, if you will. The Church of England puts his stamp on this. King Henry VIII says, I've read every word. I don't know if he did or not. He said, but this is what we're going to use. He sends a copy to every congregation and says the Bible can be read in English, but if you're going to read it in English, it's got to be from this Bible and this Bible alone. And so this Bible spreads, has a pretty good substance, but it doesn't ever really become super popular. Okay. Then you have the Beck's Bible, which becomes produced by a guy named John Dare, and it's edited by a guy named Beck. Okay, then you've got the Geneva Bible. The Geneva Bible is important because it's the Geneva Bible is the reason why you have the King James Bible. And so the Protestant movement becomes more and more popular. Calvinism becomes more and more influential with guys like John Calvin and the rest. And so these guys decide, you know what? We need a Bible. Okay, that shows what the truth is. Of course, in their mind, remember, truth is Calvinistic. Okay, Calvinism, and so they go to main continent Europe. I forget where it is. I think it's in Brussels. I think it's in Belgium, but I could be wrong. And so they decide, you know what? We're going to make a Bible, and the translation itself is not that bad, but the footnotes and the side are like hardcore Calvinistic, like bad. Now, the Church of England is not the Catholic Church, but they hold pretty much the same exact views on most about everything, right? Calvinist, Catholic Church, Church of England, don't get along, okay? And so the Geneva Bible is written, it's got the support of the Protestant movement. It's banned. They're not supposed to have the Geneva Bible. Remember, the only one you can use is the Great Bible. They start smuggling English Bible, Geneva Bibles in to England. I mean, like it's like drugs or something. I mean, just by the crates. And these Bibles just start getting spread everywhere. And these people are reading it, and they're reading the footnotes, which is a lesson for you today. Be careful of the footnotes, okay? They're not inspired. And so people start reading this, and Calvinism just starts spreading across Europe. Protestant movements is just spreading. And so the Church of England takes a step back and is like, wait a minute, we got it. This ain't working. We got to stop these Bibles from getting, we got to quit people reading these Bibles. And so then you have the Bishop's Bible, which is published by a group of bishops. They get together and they try to make a Bible and say the church is going to make a translation. Here you go. Some bishops do this. Doesn't really gain any traction. It's not very popular. And so then you get the Douay-Rheims Bible, and this was done by the Roman Catholic Church. It's the first Bible by the Catholic Church in English. It was based on the Latin Vulgate. And so the church was like, we've got to stop this thing. What was the Bible's name again that was so confrontational? Which one? Geneva Bible. I was in Geneva, Switzerland. That's why it's called Geneva Bible. Not Brussels. It's dumb. Time out. Okay, we're running to the end. Okay, so the Catholic Church comes and they say, we're going to make an official Catholic Bible in English, and you're all going to read it. And they do it, and nobody likes it. And so then we're going to get to the King James Version. And the King James Version is born out of this. We've got to stop the Geneva Bible and the footnotes that are with it. And so we're going to start with the King James Bible on Wednesday night. So if you'll come to our class on Wednesday, we'll pick up this study and we'll talk about the King James Version. And thank you so much for your comments, your questions. I appreciate your patience. And I want to thank you so much. We want to keep Miss Sharp in our prayers. I was told that she's been struggling with the flu pretty hard the last couple of days or weeks. And so let's go ahead and end with a prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for your word. We're so thankful for the opportunity and the ease that we can access your word. We're so thankful for the sacrifice that was made on our behalf by individuals who saw fit to make sure that the Bible could be in a language that we can understand. And dear Heavenly Father, please help us to also be motivated to make sure that your word is in a language that we can understand, but also places throughout the world where they still don't have translations that they can read. Please be with us and watch over us and help us to be lights in this community this week. And we also pray for all of our members who are struggling with either sicknesses, loss of loved ones, or deteriorating health. In your son's name we pray. Amen.